It's now for me to introduce Matt Wrack, who is the General Secretary of the FBU. Matt is going to talk to us in respect of public services and the protection of the NHS and trying to reverse out the privatisation. Matt has been supporting what we've been doing from the very outset. The FBU are a standout union in respect of socialism, in respect of leadership within our movement. And Matt Wrack himself has constantly played the bravest of roles in respect of putting himself forward to speak on issues of socialism, even in these most difficult circumstances within the Labour Party. So, Matt, I want to thank you for all of your support, all of the FBU's support, and the floor is yours, comrade.
Morning, comrades, and thanks, Howard, for that very kind introduction, and well done to everyone who's put this event together. We've got our party conference coming up next week, and I think it is absolutely vital that the left organises more effectively than we have done so far, because we are under attack. And while I do want to discuss some issues around public services, I think there's a very clear link about the debates we have in our unions and in our party with what is going on in the Labour Party, and we can't separate the two issues. But if we look over the past year and a half, we have lived through the most appalling times in regard to the pandemic. A horrible level of death and illness in Britain and across the world. And let's remember, this is an international pandemic. Across the world, more than 4.5 million people have died as a result of this terrible disease. But the pandemic has also exposed this rotten system and the inequalities which exist in our country and across the world. It has exposed class divisions in relation to wealth, health and power, and that workers have borne the brunt of the pandemic, whether it be key workers who have been required to carry on working and attend their workplace and thereby have been placed at greater risk of contracting the disease, or those who have suffered the economic consequences by being furloughed or subsequently losing their jobs. And at the same time, we have seen the rich get away with crony contracts and complete corruption. And those workers, the key workers, as they've been described, exist in the public and the private sector. And we need to ensure there is no divide and rule played between those of us working in the public sector and those in the private sector. We need to stand together. But I think there are some issues which we need to address for those of us who organise in the public sector. At the beginning of the pandemic, we provided a briefing to the Labour leadership about the failure of planning by the Westminster government in regard to pandemic threats. The truth is that government in Westminster has known since at least 2008 of the threat of a pandemic. It is one of the highest standing risks on the National Risk Register and has been since 2008. We work in an industry, of course, that is supposedly about risk planning and preparing for difficult situations, challenges and emergencies. So the British government was aware of this threat and yet has completely failed to plan and prepare. And it's done so at the time when it has, we've lived through a decade of austerity cuts which have undermined public services, when actually we should have been investing in public services to prepare for precisely such a risk emerging. And then at the same time, as we see key workers in the public sector and the private sector assisting our communities, assisting society to get through the pandemic, we see the beginning of emerging from the worst period of the disease, only to find out that actually public sector workers will again be asked to pay the price for the economic consequences now of COVID, with the announcement of further restrictions on pay. We're still in battles, many of us in the public sector, in regard to our pensions, and there are attacks on our members in terms of pension rights continuing, and our jobs continue to be under threat. The pandemic has completely exposed the failure to invest in our National Health Service and, of course, the utter scandal in relation to adult social care in this country. And I think everyone on this call will know it is simply not good enough to go out of an evening and clap for key workers and then tell those same people that their jobs are not safe and that they can't have a pay rise. And I have to say that having briefed the Labour Party leadership on some of these issues in quite some detail, we have been frustrated at the failure on occasion to challenge adequately the Tories in Parliament. Because we've heard that what the Labour leadership in Parliament wanted to do was to be seen to be supporting the government. That's not, in our view, the role of the opposition. The role of the opposition is to oppose. The role of the opposition is to challenge and prevent an alternative. Now, we know that that may be difficult at various times, but by providing clear facts, argument and evidence, and by providing a clear alternative, facts and experience will prove us right. And I think those opportunities sadly have been lost in relation to the handling of the pandemic and how we have challenged the Tories over that. And unfortunately, on many occasions, it has been left to us in the unions to provide that clear alternative to the attacks and the appalling behaviour of the Westminster government over the past 18 months. And that brings me on, Chair, to the question of what is going on in our party. And I make no apologies for addressing some points in relation to this, because we are seeing an unprecedented, frankly, a witch hunt against the left in our party, against the rights of individual members, against people who wish to speak out on various issues. We see a huge number of suspensions and expulsions. We're now moving into the Kafkaesque world of auto-expulsions, where people can apparently be excluded from the Labour Party without a hearing, without the right to defend themselves, without any right to appeal. We see that there are now proposals being presented, likely to be presented to Labour Party conference next week, which will exacerbate these attacks by further increasing the power of the General Secretary to effectively make up rules as he goes along and to appoint whoever he likes to administer processes against individual members or organisations or groupings within the party. We've already seen the disgraceful treatment of individual party members, including, as we heard last night, Labour members of Parliament. We've seen the expulsion of Ken Loach. We see the threat of my good friend and comrade Ian Hodson, now under threat. We see various organisations, Socialist Appeal and others, being auto-excluded. And I want to say clearly on behalf of the Fire Brigades Union, that as far as we're concerned, that approach to party democracy is an insult to the unions who created our party, and it's an insult to the rights of every single Labour Party member. And we've got to ask why they want to do it. And this is linked with the question of how effective we are in challenging the government over the COVID crisis, how effective we are in challenging the government over the attacks on workers' rights, how effective we are in challenging the government over the failure to protect public services. Because sadly, it appears very clear to us that we have a leadership which wants to make the Labour Party safe for the establishment. Well, that's not the historic task of the Labour Party. The Labour Party was created to fight and organise for working people to have a voice politically included in Parliament. That's the historic task of the Labour Party. There is clearly, in our view, an attempt to return to the worst years of Blairism, to attempt to silence the voice of the rank and file, to sideline the voices and views of trade unionists, and to drive out socialist ideas from the Labour Party. And I'll just, in drawing my comments to a conclusion, Howard, just remind people of something which I suspect the current General Secretary would find somewhat embarrassing. But in 1948, the National Executive of the Labour Party decided to publish a document, a pamphlet for people to read. It was a centenary edition of the Communist Manifesto. And what it said in there is that its publication, this is from the Labour Party National Executive in 1948, its publication coincided with the continent-wide People's Springs, the revolutions of 1848, which stretched from France to Romania and paved for the way for the fall of monarchs and the growth of mass democratic parties. As the manifesto was translated into a vast array of languages in the decades which followed, it became a cornerstone of a working class movement that would build on these revolutions to make the case for socialism. There have always been socialists in our party. Socialist organisations alongside the trade unions created the Labour Party, and socialists have no intention of surrendering our role in our party. We face a very challenging week in the coming week and a very challenging conference. And on behalf of the Fire Brigades Union, I can commit that our union will be going to conference to defend the rights of party members, to defend the rights of affiliated trade unions, and to stand up for socialism and party democracy. Thanks very much, Howard.
Matt, thank you. And as I referenced in introducing you, thanks very much for the FBU's unwavering support in respect of socialism within the Labour Party. And there's so much to ask you there, Matt, in respect of your contribution. And I will ask some questions. I'm sure Ruth has some, if that's okay with you. Matt, dealing first of all with the public services and our wish to ensure that there's no distraction from what we're trying to achieve here. Is there anything that you want to talk about in regard to privatisation, both in respect of the ongoing privatisation and outsourcing of public services, but also in regard to housing, and in particular the NHS and our responsibilities now to come together in order to out this?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Howard. We've seen, I think the pandemic has exposed the role of private contracting in public services. And we've seen very clearly, and this is an argument that can be easily winnable with the public, the huge support and respect that the population has for those working, particularly in the NHS, but other public services, I think, have to be acknowledged as well. We need to remember that there's all sorts of people in public services who've delivered throughout the pandemic. And I think there's huge opposition to the idea of contracting out those services. There is huge latent anger, which we need to bring out, about the cronyism of the contracts that have been awarded throughout the pandemic, and that needs to be exposed and challenged. And I think Labour would win huge support for being absolutely clear that we will drive privatisation out of our National Health Service, and we will bring outsourced services back in-house, and we will do the same in local government. And in relation to housing, we've done a lot of work over the past 4.5 years in relation to the aftermath of Grenfell, which again exposes the utter scandal facing this country in relation to housing. We have a whole generation now of renters who are forced into poor quality housing where other people are making vast amounts of money as landlords while millions suffer. Or people who do supposedly get on the ladder are facing the leaseholder crisis in relation to unsafe buildings. We need to commit to social housing, council housing, and we shouldn't apologise for that. We should commit to huge investments in council housing, publicly owned, built by directly employed direct labour organisations, and we shouldn't apologise for all these things. Unfortunately, the march of the marketeers that 1979 with the Thatcher government was a turning point. Unfortunately, Labour has retreated far too much in the face of that onslaught. We need to turn the tide. That was, I think, one of the opportunities. That was one of the great opportunities of the Corbyn years, but we need to say no further retreats.
Absolutely, Matt. And, it strikes me, Matt, that in France, they're already having prosecutions in respect of the handling of the minister's handling of COVID, the equivalent minister of Matt Hancock. And I just wondered what your thoughts were. I have my own views in respect of when and why Labour called for Matt Hancock to resign and what they could have said long before that in regard to the handling of the pandemic. And in particular, the decision that was made to allow COVID hospital patients to be discharged to care homes, and the thousands of people who unnecessarily died as a consequence of that?
I think the whole approach from the start has been utterly disgusting from this government. And I think that there was a failure at a whole number of turning points, and you've identified some of them, where that could and should have been challenged. We had a prime minister, let's remember, who boasted of going round shaking people's hands in COVID wards and thought this was some sort of joke. And the result is, and we know that they discussed herd immunity, which seems to lie behind a lot of their thinking still today, which effectively means sacrificing the lives of ordinary people. And Labour should have exposed these. And I think one of the problems was this whole approach that there's some national interest and we have to unite in the so-called national interest. I think COVID exposed, actually, there's two nations in this country. There's the nation of those at the top, and there's the nation of the rest of us. And the rest of us were expected to pay the price. I think if Labour, I'm not saying you do it in a crude way, but if Labour had challenged and exposed those things, including the disastrous role of ministers at various times, they could have won significant victories all the way along and put the Tories on the back foot, despite having despite the Tories having such a significant majority in Parliament. That would have had an echo, and I think we've missed lots of opportunities on that front.
Yeah, here, Matt, the biggest responsibility in all of this was to show opposition to the Tories in respect of their handling of COVID and to expose the fact that people were losing their lives as a consequence of it. And instead, the leadership chose to turn inward and have this fight with the left of the party. And on that subject, Matt, and going forward to the conference and the role that the FBU will play and the role of the left unions at conference, in specifics, the vote to endorse David Evans, how do you think that's going to play out, and what's the role of the FBU going to be?
Look, in terms of the role of the FBU, we have not yet discussed it. I've got a good idea what we will do, but we haven't yet. I don't want to, we're a democratic organisation, and I know we will have to. I haven't discussed it with the other delegates or our executive as yet, but I think you could probably guess the sort of approach we'd take. I think it's, I would strongly advise Labour's national executive and whoever's chairing that session to be open and frank with conference that the vote is coming up and people have the right to vote. Any attempt to announce that it's already been carried or whatever, I think would be met with utter outrage. Everyone knows it's coming up. I've got nothing personal. I've met David Evans a few times. But I think there are questions to be asked. Why have we lost 150,000 members? If I'd lost that scale of members in my union, people would be asking questions of me. Why are the Labour Party's finances in such a complete mess when under Corbyn we managed to eliminate historical debts? Again, if I manage our union's finances, if I'd created such a mess, there would be questions being asked about my role. So I think there are valid questions which need to be asked, and they should be part of that debate before any vote's taken.
Absolutely, Matt. Agree entirely. And those questions are leading to people being made redundant. Let's everybody remember the fact that Labour Party right here now is making staff redundant who otherwise would be employed if it wasn't for the fact that we are losing members hand over fist and losing finance hand over fist. And in reference to the solidarity to Ian Hudson, can I just join in that, Matt, and also give solidarity out to Jess Bartlett and Kate Osborne. Kate Osborne MP, for those who don't know, was issued with an auto expulsion letter yesterday, retracted by the Labour Party after a legal response, but she was given 22 minutes in respect of the courtesy of editing that letter before it was sent to her to claim that a Labour MP was to be expelled, and along with Jess, put through all of the trauma. And Matt, just on that, on the final note, just a point of humanity, your thoughts about what people are going through at the moment through the Labour Party's apparatchik attacking them in respect of their membership, people who have obviously been through mental trauma through COVID, as all of us have been, and then to receive letters saying that they are to be auto-expelled from the party that they love and have given so much to.
I think it's disgraceful to treat people who, let's remember that the Labour Party is a voluntary organisation of people who come together, join the party and pay the relevant rate to be voluntary members of an organisation. There should be some respect given for people doing that, and to be treated. I mean, the two cases that you've mentioned are absolutely shocking. These sort of faceless letters that people receive, only then to be retracted with a half-baked apology. It's grotesque. We wouldn't accept it in workplaces. We would challenge it, and yet the Labour Party, which there's a big glaring contradiction. How can we argue for justice in society if we don't have justice in our own party? And I think that needs to be challenged.
Thanks, Matt. And it's Jess Barnard, so my apologies to Jess in respect of referencing her surname. Ruth, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Howard. If I may just ask a question, Matt, and then we'll go to our next speaker, if that's okay, which is just really to pick up the role of trade unions in taking a lead really on some of the health and safety issues during the COVID pandemic. So we've seen, I know from my own union, the huge impact on bus workers. Shop workers have also been affected, all public servants, school staff. The NEU has played a major role in bringing people together. And just what we can learn for the effective ways that trade unions have engaged their members and given people information to empower them to push for proper health and safety at work.
Yeah, I think it's been a real test for trade unions, and it's been a credit to them that they have intervened, because it's very clear that when you've got workplace safety reps, you can make the workplace safer in relation to a threat like COVID. And when you don't, employers will abuse the workers and workers' safety. So I think the ability of unions to challenge, and I think the health unions obviously have had to expose the shocking absence of PPE, which again is a clear, obvious requirement on employers to provide appropriate PPE where necessary. But actually, the first thing to do is to remove the worker from the risk. So the need for trained safety reps, I think the trade union movement really needs to come together in the aftermath of this, discuss the lessons, and making demands for the future. In our own sector, we reached very clearly early on a national agreement, which our members wanted to take on additional work. So we went into hospitals, helping out in hospitals. We had people driving ambulances, training ambulance drivers, delivering equipment to care homes, sadly moving the bodies of the deceased and so on. But the framework for that was an agreement collectively bargained, which included the requirements for risk assessments, for PPE, for training, and for adequate resources. And that's the power of having a well-organised union in the workplace. And I think we need to make that a central part of post-COVID campaigning, the trade unions, and I think the Labour Party needs to take account of that. Yeah, actually, I do notice that Keir Starmer at the TUC last week did mention some of those elements, and that was welcome. And he mentioned the agreement we'd reached in the fire and rescue service. So I think there's a huge challenge. There's still issues going on, however, of course. We've got the threat of long COVID, and we don't know fully the impact of that on workers. And we've got our own battles. We're trying to identify the detail of cases of COVID in our own sector. And for example, we're in a row with the Health and Safety Executive because currently they've refused to provide certain information we have written them to about. So it's never an easy battle, but unions, I think, will have learned a lot about safety from the COVID pandemic, and we need to build that. It's about being organised in the workplace. And I suppose my final point is, don't ever rely on your employer or your boss to deliver your safety. You have to organise for it yourself and have a trained union safety rep in the workplace.
Thanks very much indeed, Matt. Really important points. And I think, again, it demonstrates the amazing response from a lot of frontline workers and communities, and that we need to build on that and ensure that the Labour Party picks up those demands and that real renewed. I understand trade union membership's grown 4 years in a row. That's really good. It's still not dense enough. If anyone is watching this who isn't in a union, definitely join a union. Get involved, not just join, but get active, join your trades council, and lots of issues for us to pick up.
Get organized.